There is a man you probably know. Maybe you have worked beside him for years. Maybe you grew up with him. Maybe, if you are honest enough to sit with the discomfort of this for a moment, maybe that man is you. He is agreeable. He is considerate. He never raises his voice and rarely raises an objection. He goes along with things that bother him without saying so. He absorbs other people's moods and difficulties with a patience that looks, from the outside, like genuine compassion. He makes the people around him comfortable. He is easy to be with. He is, by every conventional social metric, a nice person. And he is, beneath that niceness, one of the most quietly desperate men in any room he enters. Carl Jung spent decades sitting across from men and women who presented exactly this way: functional, pleasant, socially smooth, oriented entirely toward the comfort and approval of others. And what he found beneath those presentations, when he finally got beneath them, was not the warmth and genuine care the persona advertised. What he found was something the persona had been built specifically to conceal: rage. Resentment accumulated over years of unexpressed need, a profound uncertainty about whether the actual self, the unmanaged, unperformed, genuinely felt self, was acceptable to anyone at all. A terror never quite articulated, but operating continuously beneath the agreeable surface, that if the niceness were to drop even briefly, something about the man underneath would be found unacceptable, would be rejected, would confirm the deepest and most private fear he carried, that he was not, in his actual nature, a someone anyone would choose. Jung called what this man had built his persona, and he said something about it that most men who hear it initially resist and eventually cannot escape. The persona is not your personality. It is the mask your personality learned to wear in order to survive the specific environments that shaped you. And the nice person persona, the one built around agreeableness and accommodation and the relentless management of other people's emotional states, is one of the most complete and most costly masks a man can build, because it does not merely conceal certain qualities. It conceals the entire premise that the man beneath it has qualities worth expressing, that his preferences matter, that his discomfort is real and legitimate, that his anger, which is real because everyone's anger is real, has somewhere honest to go. This video is about what the nice person persona costs and what Jung believed was on the other side of dismantling it, not the other side of becoming unpleasant or aggressive or indifferent to other people's experience, but the other side of a performance that was never sustainable, never honest, and never actually earned what it was built to earn. Because the deepest irony of the nice person, the one Jung identified with his characteristic precision, is this: the niceness that was built to generate genuine love and genuine belonging generates almost exactly neither. It generates something adjacent to both, something that is comfortable and pleasant and fundamentally unsatisfying to everyone involved, including the person performing it. The niceness that was supposed to make you lovable makes you, instead, manageable. And being managed is not the same as being loved, not even close. If you have felt the specific loneliness of being the person everyone gets along with and no one quite knows, this video is for you. If you have felt the specific exhaustion of being endlessly accommodating and somehow perpetually depleted rather than fulfilled by the giving, this video is for you. And if you are serious about understanding what genuine presence actually requires and what it costs to build it, subscribe, because this channel exists for exactly the man who is ready to stop performing and start becoming. How the nice person persona gets built. It does not begin as a performance. That is the first thing to understand. And understanding it is important because it is the thing that makes the persona feel so natural, so genuinely like your personality rather than a mask worn over it. The nice person persona is built by an intelligent child, responding intelligently to a specific set of conditions. A child who learned, through direct experience rather than instruction, that his anger was dangerous, that it produced withdrawal, punishment, escalation, or the specific horror of watching someone he loved become afraid of or disgusted by him. A child who discovered that agreeableness produced approval, and that approval in the specific environment he inhabited was the closest available substitute for the genuine security he needed. A child who found that making himself useful, making himself pleasant, making himself the one who smoothed difficulties and absorbed tensions and never added to the load, generated a kind of belonging. Not the belonging of being fully known and fully accepted, but the belonging of being needed and welcomed and reliably present. That child was not wrong to build what he built. He was solving the problem his environment presented with the tools his environment made available. He was doing what intelligent, sensitive children always do, reading the room with extraordinary accuracy and adapting himself to survive it. The tragedy is not the adaptation. The tragedy is what happens when the adaptation becomes permanent, when the intelligent child grows into a man who still has access to the same survival strategy and almost nothing else, who walks into every room of his adult life, still reading the temperature, still adjusting his presentation to the preferences of the people around him, is still suppressing whatever in him might generate friction or disappointment or conflict, because the nervous system that learned to do this at 7 years old has never received the information that the conditions which made it necessary no longer apply. Jung observed that most people's psychological development essentially stalls at the point where their most successful adaptation was formed, not because they are not intelligent, not because they have not accomplished extraordinary things in their external lives, but because the internal architecture, the actual structure of how they relate to themselves and to other people, was built under conditions that no longer exist, around a strategy that is no longer the best available option and has never been fundamentally revised since. The man who built his niceness under the conditions of his childhood is still building it under those conditions, because those conditions live on inside him as the unconscious assumptions that shape every social encounter he enters. The nice person persona, specifically, carries one assumption above all others, and it is the assumption that does the most damage. It carries the assumption that the actual self, the one with preferences and edges and anger and genuine disagreement and real desire, is too much, that if it were expressed honestly, it would rupture something essential about the relationships and the belonging the man depends on, and so it stays inside. It stays managed. It stays year after year, a private interior that never quite makes contact with the exterior world, and the man wonders, with a kind of quiet ache he rarely names directly, why nothing quite feels real, why even his closest relationships have a quality of glass about them, why he is never quite sure whether the people who say they love him, or love the performance of him. That is all they have ever been given access to. What niceness actually is here is the distinction Jung was drawing that most people miss, because it is a distinction that the culture actively resists making. There is genuine kindness, and there is performed niceness. They look almost identical from the outside. They are polar opposites in their origins, their costs and their effects. Genuine kindness comes from surplus. It is the expression of a man who has enough, who is in contact with himself, who genuinely cares about other people and extends that care because extending it feels consistent with who he is, rather than because withholding it feels dangerous. The genuinely kind man can say no. He can disagree. He can disappoint. He can express his own discomfort and his own preference and his own genuine reaction to things without the gesture of kindness being threatened, because his kindness was never dependent on the suppression of his actual self in the first place. It was never a performance. It was never armor. It was simply how he chose, from a place of genuine contact with himself, to be in relation to the people around him. Performed niceness comes from scarcity. It comes from the deep and largely unconscious belief that the actual self is not enough, and that the only way to maintain connection and belonging is to replace the actual self with a presentation engineered to be acceptable. The nice person, in Jung's clinical sense, is not being kind. He is managing. He is managing other people's perceptions, managing their emotional states, managing the probability that they will continue to approve of him. Every smile that does not match his interior state, every agreement that contradicts his genuine opinion, every accommodation of behavior that actually bothers him is not generosity. It is the installment payment on a debt he believes he owes simply for taking up space in the room. Seneca understood this distinction with his characteristic precision. He wrote that there is a difference between the man who gives freely and the man who cannot refuse. The first man is generous. The second man is trapped. And the trap he is in is the trap of his own assumption about his own acceptability. He cannot refuse because the refusal feels like a revelation of something he is not yet willing to let be revealed. That he has a self with actual preferences, and that self might not always align with what the people around him want from him. That revelation feels catastrophic precisely because it would test the premise the persona was built to avoid testing. It would put his actual self in contact with the actual responses of real people, and he would finally have information about whether those responses are as devastating as he has always feared. The persona protects him from that information. It also prevents him from ever discovering that he was wrong to be afraid of it. The Stoics had a word for the man who lives entirely by the judgment of others. They did not consider it a form of social grace. They considered it a form of slavery. Epictetus, who understood slavery from lived experience, was unambiguous. The man who requires the approval of others to feel acceptable has made himself the captive of every person whose approval he seeks. His inner state, his peace, his sense of his own worth is entirely at the mercy of how other people are choosing to respond to him on any given day. That is not a generous spirit. It is the most complete form of self-abandonment available to a man who is nominally free. The shadow of the nice person. Jung's framework of the shadow is nowhere more visible, nowhere more practically significant than in the psychology of the nice person, because the shadow, remember, is everything that was excluded from the persona, and the nice person persona excludes an extraordinary amount. It excludes anger because anger is the emotion most at odds with the agreeable presentation. It excludes genuine selfishness, the healthy kind, the kind that allows a man to know what he wants and pursue it without constant reference to whether the pursuit will inconvenience someone else. It excludes competitive drive because competition implies wanting to win, which implies being willing to let someone else lose, which the nice person cannot bear to be responsible for. It excludes contempt, which everyone feels sometimes toward things that are genuinely beneath their standard. It excludes desire in its full, unmanaged form, because desire makes demands, and the nice person does not make demands. It excludes, most fundamentally of all, the capacity for genuine aggression, which is not the same as violence, but is the force, the forward press, the willingness to occupy space and pursue what matters and defend what is genuinely important, without which no man can build anything real or protect anything worth protecting. All of that material goes into the shadow, and because it goes in unexamined, without the metabolization that conscious engagement would allow, it does not disappear. It builds. It accumulates, it pressurizes, and it comes out, as shadow material always does, sideways. in the specific bitterness the nice man feels toward people who express the aggression he has denied himself, in the contempt he secretly holds and would be mortified to acknowledge for the people whose approval he is simultaneously working so hard to maintain, in the passive aggression that is the shadow's most characteristic mode of expression in the nice person, the subtle undermining, the withheld effort, the strategic forgetting, the disappointment that manages to be communicated through every channel except the direct one, in the resentment that accumulates year after year from a life of unexpressed need and suppressed preference until it reaches a volume that the persona can no longer contain, and the man who everyone described as so patient, so easygoing, so reliably pleasant, does something that shocks everyone who knew him, including himself. This is the crisis Jung was describing when he talked about the shadow demanding integration. The shadow does not accept permanent suppression. The force of what has been excluded always, eventually, finds a way out. And the longer the exclusion has been maintained, the more violent and the more destabilizing the eruption tends to be when it finally comes. The man who has spent 20 years never expressing genuine anger does not one day simply express it clearly and proportionally. He explodes in ways that feel to everyone, including himself, completely inconsistent with who he is supposed to be, because they are completely inconsistent with who the persona presents him as being. They are entirely consistent with who he actually is, with the full human being who has been trapped behind the performance for 20 years and who is no longer willing to stay there. The alternative to that eruption is not continued suppression. It is the patient, honest, unglamorous work of bringing the shadow material into conscious relationship, of acknowledging the anger before it reaches critical pressure, of allowing the genuine selfishness its appropriate expression rather than pretending it doesn't exist, of making contact with the aggression and learning to channel it rather than deny it, because the man who cannot access his aggression cannot protect what matters to him, cannot pursue what genuinely drives him, cannot occupy the kind of presence in the world that a fully developed man is capable of. The shadow is not your enemy. It is your unlived life, demanding to be lived. What your niceness does to other people. Here is the part of Jung's analysis that is most difficult to hear if you have organized your identity around being a person who is good to others. Because what he observed with consistent clinical precision is that the nice person's niceness is not only costly to himself, it is costly to the people around him, and the cost it imposes on them is not obvious. It looks like consideration. It is, in its actual effect, a form of deprivation. When you are performing niceness rather than being genuine, the people in your life do not have access to you. They have access to the performance, and the performance, however pleasant, cannot provide what genuine presence provides. It cannot provide the friction of real difference of opinion, which is one of the things that makes relationships actually develop people rather than simply confirm them. It cannot provide the kind of honest engagement that allows someone to know they are genuinely known by another person rather than merely accommodated by one. It cannot provide the specific confidence a person feels when someone they respect pushes back on their thinking because the nice person does not push back. He agrees, or he absorbs, or he deflects with warmth, but he never quite offers the resistance that would make genuine contact possible. The people who love the nice man, if they are honest, often describe a strange loneliness in the relationship, not a loneliness from absence because he is always present, a loneliness from the quality of the presence, the sense that they cannot quite find him, that they reach for something real and find only warmth, that they want to know what he actually thinks, actually feels, actually wants. And the question does not produce an answer so much as it produces another version of the performance. They begin to feel that they are talking to a mirror rather than a man, that they are having their own experience reflected back with care and consideration, and without the one thing genuine encounter requires, someone actually on the other side. And there is something else that the nice person's niceness does to people, something even more uncomfortable to acknowledge. It creates a specific kind of contempt, not in everyone, not dramatically, but consistently in the people whose respect matters most, in the people who have their own genuine substance and can recognize the absence of it in others. A quiet contempt develops for the man who will not be himself, who adjusts to every expectation and expresses no genuine preference and absorbs every accommodation request without limits, because the man who is that accommodating is communicating something about his own self-assessment. He is communicating through the full body of his behavior that his own interior life is not worth the disruption of a genuine expression, that his own reality does not quite make the cut as something worth defending. And people who are paying attention read that communication, and they respond to it, not with the appreciation the nice man is hoping to generate, but with the diminished regard that is the natural response to a man who has demonstrated a diminished regard for himself. Marcus Aurelius wrote that a man must hold himself to the standard of what a complete human being actually requires, not what is comfortable, not what is socially smooth, what genuine completeness requires. And genuine completeness requires, among other things, that you be someone, that you hold positions, that you occupy your own experience with enough solidity that other people encountering you encounter actual resistance, actual substance, an actual other person rather than a mirror and a pleasing reflection. The nice person has not done that. He has made himself disappear in service of the comfort of others, and in doing so has deprived both himself and them of the one thing no performance can substitute for, a genuine human encounter. The anger you are not allowed to have. Let us stay here for a moment, because this is the place the nice person most needs to spend time and most consistently avoids. The anger. Not the abstract recognition that anger exists in the shadow. The specific, particular anger that has been accumulating in the specific man reading this, in the specific contexts of his specific life, that has never been expressed or examined or given any form of honest acknowledgement at all, because it is there. If you have been performing niceness for years, the anger is there in direct proportion to the duration and the completeness of the performance. Every time you agreed with something you disagreed with, every time you stayed quiet when you had something real to say, every time you accommodated something that actually bothered you rather than naming it, every time you gave more than you had and received less than you needed and behaved as though the imbalance was fine, every time you watched someone take something from you, your time, your energy, your resources, your emotional labor, and responded with grace rather than a genuine reckoning about whether the taking was acceptable. All of that produced something. It did not evaporate. It did not become peace through the simple act of not being expressed. It became fuel for something that has been building somewhere beneath your agreeable surface for longer than you might be entirely comfortable admitting. Jung was not interested in having his patients simply express their anger as though expression alone were the cure. He was interested in what the anger was pointing at, in what it was protecting, in what need it was signaling that had been chronically unmet because the persona had made the meeting of genuine needs look too much like the imposition of genuine inconvenience on other people, because that is what the nice person has learned to believe about himself. That his needs are an imposition, that his genuine reactions are a burden, that the full reality of what he actually experiences, when it differs from what would be comfortable for others, is something that the people in his life should not have to deal with. and so he deals with it alone. He metabolizes it alone. He carries it alone. And then he wonders why he is so tired. The anger, when you finally make honest contact with it, is not the problem. The anger is information. It is the most reliable signal your interior life has been sending you for years about the places where you have abandoned yourself, about the relationships where more has been taken than given and the imbalance has never been addressed, about the environments and dynamics and arrangements that do not serve you and that you have stayed in beyond any reasonable term because leaving felt like a kind of aggression you were not permitted to commit, about the preferences and desires and ambitions that are genuinely yours and that you have suppressed so thoroughly in service of the performance that you have sometimes actually lost track of whether you have any genuine preferences at all. The anger, engaged honestly rather than either performed or suppressed, tells you what matters to you. It is one of the clearest signals the psyche sends about where the actual values live beneath the performed ones. The things that make you genuinely angry, when you let yourself feel that anger without immediately moving to manage or suppress it, are the things you actually care about. Your anger tells you where your lines are, and the man who does not know where his lines are cannot defend them, and the man who cannot defend his lines is not, in any meaningful sense, a man who has lines. He is a man who has suggestions. Epictetus was not gentle about this. He taught that the man who does not know what he values and act in accordance with that knowledge is not yet a free man regardless of any external measure of his freedom. The nice man's freedom is nominal. He is technically free to say anything, to go anywhere, to choose anything, and he uses that freedom consistently to say what others want to hear, to go where it will cause the least disruption, to choose what will maintain the smoothest possible surface in every room he occupies. That is not freedom. That is the most sophisticated form of captivity available to a man who has mistaken his chains for his character, the specific courage required. If the nice person persona is not who you are but a mask you built, then the work of removing it is not simply a matter of deciding to be different. The mask has been in place long enough that removing it, genuinely and structurally, rather than as a performance of authenticity, that is itself another kind of performance, requires something specific and genuinely demanding. It requires the courage to test the premise the mask was built to protect, to find out in actual practice with actual people whether the fear that drove the construction of the persona was ever accurate. That fear, to name it directly, is the fear that the actual self be expressed without the management and the accommodation and the endless smoothing will be found unacceptable, that the genuine man will be rejected where the performing man was welcomed, that the preferences and the edges and the anger and the genuine disagreement will cost him the belonging he has organized his entire social presentation to secure. And the reason this fear is so hard to test is that the persona actively prevents the testing. As long as you are performing niceness, you never get actual feedback about whether you, as you genuinely are, would be accepted, because you as you genuinely are has never been put in front of anyone to accept or reject. What the courage actually requires in practical terms is starting small and being honest with yourself about how small can be and still count. It does not require a dramatic reveal of every suppressed feeling simultaneously. It does not require the conversion of the nice person into an aggressive person, which is simply the shadow flooding the field without integration. It requires the next genuine preference expressed to someone whose response you are somewhat afraid of. The next genuine disagreement stated clearly rather than managed diplomatically into non-existence. The next thing that bothers you named honestly rather than absorbed silently. The next request met with a no that does not come with a lengthy apology designed to restore the comfort you have disturbed. And then you watch what happens, because what Jung was insisting beneath all the technical apparatus of his psychological framework was that the premise the nice person had built his entire persona to protect is almost always wrong. That the actual self, expressed with the honest imperfection of a man who is still learning to locate it, tends to generate more genuine connection rather than less. That the people worth keeping in your life respond to your genuine presence with something they have never been able to offer the performance, genuine engagement. That the friction of your real opinions and your real disagreements and your real requirements, far from rupturing the relationships that matter, tends to deepen them in ways the frictionless performance never could. Because now there is something actual to engage with. Now there is a person rather than a service. And people, the right people, respond to persons. The wrong people, the ones who genuinely preferred the performance because it required nothing of them and gave them everything they wanted from the interaction, those people will respond to your emerging genuine self with something that feels like disapproval or withdrawal or disappointment. And that response, painful as it is the most important information you will have received from those relationships. It tells you what the relationship was actually for. It tells you that what was being maintained was not a connection between two people, but a transaction between a provider of comfort and a recipient of it. And the ending of that transaction, though it produces real grief, also produces real space. Space for something that was never possible as long as the performance was running. Space for something real, the man on the other side. What Jung was pointing toward and what the Stoic tradition had been pointing toward for 2,000 years before him is a man who is recognizably present, who can be found by the people in his life because he is actually there, because the person you encounter when you engage with him is the same person in every room, the same person in public and in private, the same person when he is valued and when he is challenged, the same person when agreement is easy and when disagreement is genuinely costly. That man is not perfectly comfortable to be around. He has opinions that not everyone will share. He has limits that not everyone will appreciate. He has anger that he expresses proportionally and honestly, rather than suppressing until it pressurizes. He has preferences that sometimes conflict with the preferences of others, and he says so without the lengthy apology that converts honesty into another form of performance. He disappoints people sometimes, and he is not destroyed by having disappointed them. He holds a line when holding it matters, and he holds it without converting the holding into theater. He is, in the most ordinary and most radical sense of the word, himself. And the relationships this man builds are different in kind from the relationships the nice person maintains. They are fewer in many cases, because the actual self expressed genuinely is less universally palatable than the performing self. And some of the connections that were held by the performance do not survive the transition to something more genuine. But the ones that survive are real. They are built on actual contact between actual people. They contain the specific kind of trust that only develops between people who have seen something genuine in each other and chosen, from that honest seeing, to remain. They contain the possibility of genuine intimacy, which is not the closeness of two people who make each other comfortable, but the closeness of two people who have made each other genuinely known. Aristotle's highest form of friendship, the friendship of virtue, requires this. It requires two people who are actually present to each other, who can offer genuine opposition as well as genuine support, who can tell each other the truth that is harder to hear than the version that would maintain smooth feeling between them. That kind of friendship is simply not available to the nice person, not because he is not capable of it, but because the performance prevents it. The performance keeps everyone at the distance required to maintain the comfortable surface. And at that distance, the profound encounter that Aristotle was describing never quite becomes possible. Seneca wrote that the man who has not befriended himself has no friend. It is the precise statement of everything this video has been building toward. The nice person has not befriended himself. He has made himself available endlessly and exhaustingly to everyone around him and has withheld from himself the one thing that makes any of that availability worth anything: honest contact with his own actual nature, his own genuine preferences, his own real limits, his own anger, his own desire, his own full and complete and complicated humanity. Until he extends that friendship to himself, everything he extends to others is a performance rather than a gift. And no one, not truly, can be nourished by a performance, no matter how skillfully it is sustained.